Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is just an update on what is happening in Zimbabwe. The situation is still uncertain. Zanu PF is going ahead with Mnangagwa is appointing his ministers. He took his oath on Monday, and then the councillors followed the following day, taking their oath of office, and then the MPs and so forth. Today he has been appointing his ministers. So as far as Zanu PF is concerned, it's business as usual. But I think the die has been cast. The SADC report is unequivocal. The 23rd August elections were flawed. That cannot be denied. Here is a cartoon of somebody trying to depict the real Zimbabwe now, how it has become such a divided nation. This cartoon is showing on the left-hand side the filthy poor majority living from hand to mouth, living in shacks. You can see that there are no facilities of any kind there. Such things as privacy is a luxury they can't afford. And on the right-hand side, divided by a very high wall, topped with razor fence, is the area designated Zanu PF. I think in this case here, we can say Zanu PF is equal to the Zanu PF ruling elite, their families and cronies, their select few like judges, the top brass in the security services, and let's not forget the opposition. One can see why the opposition have found the gravy train seats offered as bait for them to participate and give the process legitimacy, have found them completely irresistible. By accepting that bribe and fighting for it, and the few who have got it, they have found themselves moving from the left to the luxuries of Zanu PF, at least for the while they remain in office. Moving from the poor to become one of the filthy rich is a quantum leap, and very few ever make it. And when you have made it, for instance, just one of the few who was able to win the few gravy train seats that are offered as bait, you're not going to refuse it. So in this case here, CCC have been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. but they still soldiered on because they knew that if you win the few seats Zanu PF is offering as paid, you will be able to move from the filthy poor to the filthy rich side. The lifestyle of the filthy rich is one of unparalleled luxury. Indeed, some of those are the very apex of the filthy rich, like Grace Mugabe and his family. They've all but moved out of Zimbabwe altogether. It is widely believed that she spends most of her time in Dubai or Singapore. She only visits Zimbabwe. She's a lever in Zimbabwe. The big mansion that she built, Ushungo, the blue roof, is believed to have costed between 3 to 4 billion US dollars. It's now lying empty because the two sons are hardly ever there in Zimbabwe as well, from what the gossip is saying. I think they spend most of their time in South Africa. They attended the operation. They had to show their gratitude to Mnangagwa for allowing them to continue to enjoy their super rich lifestyles. And those who are ministers, this is where, when you get a loan of $500,000 US dollars over and above all the generous salary and allowances that you're getting, you can afford to live in luxury. And if you look after some of the wealth that you make while you're in government, you can afford to stay on the right-hand side for at least the rest of your life. But there's no doubt that many of the Zanu PF leadership have found themselves out of favor with the regime. And those who do fall out of favor, they are thrown over the high wall to join the masses, the filthy rich, the filthy poor masses. It's interesting how somebody like Ditmas Mutasa, when he fell out of favor with the regime, within half a year, the signs were that he was under serious stress. He found himself with a mountain of an electricity bill. While he was minister, he clearly was ignoring the bill, was not paying it. And now that he no longer had the protection of the party, the power utility was after him. And he found himself in a situation where he was struggling to pay the bill. Many other politicians within Zanu PF itself have found themselves in a similar situation. Those who were in power last parliament and failed to get in again, I think it won't be long before they have to move from the right to the left. because the life of those on the right-hand side is very expensive. And most of them, without the protection of the party, you can't afford it. That's why it was such a dog-eat-dog. It is a pity that Zimbabwe has come to this. The greed of the few have wasted the country's resources, whereas if it was distributed properly and spent for the good of the nation, yes, maybe not everybody would be living, enjoying the same lifestyle as those on the right-hand side, but they will have a decent life. We have reached a point now where the filthy rich are spending millions of dollars on houses, cars, and other luxuries, when the masses can't even afford one decent day. And the situation is not going to get any better. But one can also see why Zanu PF is not going to give up power without a fight. Most of them know that if Zanu PF lose power, they will be forced, at least until the whole country's economy revives, they will find themselves living among the poor. And some of them who were involved in serious looting, they may find that their loot will be taken away from them. That frightens the living daylights out of them. And so we can imagine that Zanu PF ruling elite, at least, will be fighting tooth and nail to stop the formation of the government of national unity. If they lose that battle, they'll fight tooth and nail to make sure that that government of national unity does not implement any meaningful reform, just as the 2008 to 2013 government of national unity failed to implement meaningful reform and thus dilute Zanu PF's power to rig elections. We have got a serious challenge on our hands. I think SADC and the AU have done us a big favor in calling off these elections for what they are. It is now up to Zimbabweans themselves to make sure that Zanu PF accepts the need for democratic change and accepts the need for a government of national unity that will implement those democratic changes. The present situation is unsustainable. The reason why millions of Zimbabweans have left the country is because they were facing serious poverty. This is unsustainable. We cannot carry on the way we are. I think it is important to emphasize what our demands should be in this government of national unity. It should implement all the democratic changes necessary to secure the right of every Zimbabwean to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is at the heart of the democratic changes we're talking about. We have got to dispense with this idea that somehow Zanu PF has got the right to rule the country. They don't. No one has the right to rule the country. The mandate to govern the country should be derived from the people in a free, fair, and credible election. So it is absolutely mandatory that the new government of national unity implements the democratic reforms to guarantee that fundamental right, the right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is what is at the heart of this. It is a fight that we cannot afford to lose. As a nation, we really cannot afford to lose this fight. Failing to implement the reforms in the last GNU is what got us into this mess. Ever since the end of the GNU in 2013, Zimbabwe has not been making progress at all. It has been regressing all the time. It's interesting that the last 5 years, for instance, the country has not discussed anything of substance on the economy, the social conditions, the suffering of the ordinary people, building infrastructure. All we've been concerned about is whether or not that these elections were going to be free, fair, and credible. Mnangagwa himself is believed that he must have spent at least $5 billion in buying votes, bribing key officials from ZEC to the police to judges and so forth. $5 billion while the country's economy is crumbling. This is a tragedy. And what we have to show for it? Nothing. Because now the elections have been declared so flawed, they could not possibly produce a legitimate government. We really must bite the bullet. Let's deal with this problem, this case of rigged elections. Let's have a GNU that will implement all the democratic reforms. That is the number one challenge Zimbabwe is facing today. And it is one that we cannot afford to fail. It is important that as many Zimbabweans out there articulate what is it they want. Because SADC is not going to push Zanu PF for us. Getting Zanu PF to admit that the elections were rigged, as we can see, has been tough enough for SADC to achieve that. But if we seriously think SADC is going to do everything for us, we've got something else coming. If we fail to push for a meaningful GNU that will implement the reform, it will be entirely our fault. We missed the boat last time. We can't afford to miss it again this time. Thank you very much for listening, and good night. We'll be discussing this issue because I think this is the number one issue on the national agenda. The country is not going anywhere until we sort out this mess of the case of rigged elections and bad governance. That is the truth. Thank you again, and good night.